first-class cabin hummed, with quiet conversations, the soft rustling of newspapers, and the occasional clink of champagne glasses. Passengers leaned back in their plush leather seats, scrolling through their phones or enjoying their complimentary drinks, completely unaware that this flight was about to become unforgettable. At seat 2A, a woman sat calmly by the window, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. Her name was Danielle Hayes, and though she carried herself with quiet confidence, nothing about her screamed wealth or status, and that's exactly how she liked it. She wasn't just another first-class passenger, she wasn't just another business traveler, she owned the airline. But Emily Watson, the lead flight attendant, didn't know that yet. Emily had worked in first class for years, developing a reputation for being strict and by the book. She believed in maintaining the exclusivity of first class, ensuring that only those who belonged were there. And within moments, her entire world was about to unravel. As real-life stories now brings you this gripping, true-to-life story, ask yourself, how often do we judge people based on how they look rather than who they truly are? Stay with us, because this flight is about to take a turn no one expected. The steady hum of the engines blended into the soft murmur of conversation. The first-class cabin was a world of quiet luxury, sleek seats, warm lighting, and effortless service. Danielle Hayes gazed out the small oval window, watching as the last few pieces of luggage were loaded onto the plane. Her understated elegance was intentional, a fitted navy blouse, tailored slacks, and a single gold bracelet on her wrist. No flashy jewelry, no entourage, no need for attention. She had flown hundreds of times before, and every time she kept the same routine. No special treatment, no grand announcements, just another passenger in first class. But Emily Watson, the flight attendant, didn't see it that way. With sharp eyes and a rigid posture, Emily moved methodically through the aisle, checking on passengers. Her tone was polite, but firm. She had spent years enforcing the rules, ensuring first class remained a space for those who deserved it. And then she saw seat 2A. She stopped. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Something about this woman felt off. A flicker of doubt crept into Emily's mind. She didn't recognize this passenger. No designer handbag, no high-profile aura, just calm confidence and quiet presence. Her steps slowed, and then she made her decision. Emily Watson cleared her throat. She took a small step forward. "Excuse me, ma'am." Danielle turned her head, her expression neutral. Emily tilted her head, shifting her weight. "I need to see your boarding pass." A few passengers subtly turned their heads, sensing the shift in the air. Why was only one person being asked to show their ticket? Danielle blinked, caught slightly off guard. She glanced around. No one else was being asked the same question. But she didn't argue. With the same quiet confidence, she reached into her bag, retrieved her boarding pass, and handed it over. Emily took it, her eyes scanning the details. Seat 2A first class, everything checked out, but for some reason she still wasn't satisfied. Emily hesitated, then, in a voice that was measured but undeniably skeptical, she asked, "Are you sure this is your seat?" Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The tension was subtle, but growing. A few rows back, Jonathan Price, a seasoned businessman, casually lowered his champagne glass, now watching with curiosity. Mia Reynolds, a woman in her 50s, flipping through a magazine, glanced over the top of the pages. Danielle inhaled slowly. Her response was calm, even, unshaken. "That's what the ticket says." Emily didn't move. For just a moment, the discomfort lingered, hanging thick in the air. Passengers waited for Emily's response. Danielle extended her hand. "If there's an issue, I'd like my ticket back." Emily's fingers tightened around the slip of paper, a second too long, and then she let it go. "Enjoy your flight," she said, her voice clipped and forced. Then without another word, she turned on her heel and walked away. Danielle exhaled slowly, tucking the ticket back into her bag. She thought that was the end of it. She was wrong. It was only the beginning. The plane had reached cruising altitude, gliding smoothly above the clouds. The seatbelt sign flicked off, and passengers settled into their routines. Some watched movies, others flipped through magazines, and a few sipped on glasses of champagne. The earlier tension in the cabin had faded into the quiet rhythm of the flight. Or so Danielle thought. Then Emily Watson returned. This time her movements were sharper, more decisive. She stopped at seat 2A. Passengers felt the shift before they even saw it. Her presence alone sent a ripple of unease through the cabin. Danielle slowly removed an earbud, looking up. Emily folded her arms. "I need you to come with me." Danielle's brow arched ever so slightly. "Excuse me?" Emily's expression didn't change. "We need to have a conversation, in private." Now the first-class passengers were watching, not just glancing, watching. Danielle remained calm, composed, still. "If there's something you need to say," she replied evenly, "you can say it here." Emily's nostrils flared, her voice hardened. "This isn't a discussion." Danielle's fingers interlaced in her lap. "And if I don't?" Emily's jaw tightened. "Then she made a mistake." "Then I'll have to involve security when we land." A murmur rippled through the cabin. From a few rows away, Jonathan Pryce set his drink down completely now, his eyes locked onto the scene unfolding before him. Passengers exchanged quick glances. Something was wrong. Just then, Hannah Lee, a younger flight attendant, stepped in. Her voice was careful, questioning. "Is there a problem here?" Before Danielle could answer, Emily spoke for her. "She's refusing to cooperate." Hannah blinked. "Cooperate with what?" Emily hesitated. Danielle turned to Hannah, her voice steady. "She hasn't actually told me why she wants me to move." A small pause. Then Mia Reynolds, still holding her magazine, let out a sharp scoff from a few rows back. "You've got to be kidding me." Passengers exchanged more glances. Whispers started to spread. Hannah frowned, looking back at Emily. "You already checked her ticket?" Emily squared her shoulders. "I need to verify it again." This time, there was no missing the gasps and quiet scoffs from the surrounding passengers. Danielle's lips parted slightly, not in shock, not in fear, in understanding. Slowly, deliberately, she reached into her bag, pulled out her boarding pass and held it up, for everyone to see. Her voice was cool, unshaken. "Go ahead. Verify it again." Emily hesitated, a second too long, and that's when Hannah stepped in first. She snatched the ticket before Emily could, her eyes quickly scanning the details. A second later, she exhaled sharply. "She's in the right seat." Silence. Passengers murmured. Jonathan Pryce leaned back in his chair, a slow smirk forming on his face. Emily's fingers twitched, her throat bobbed as she swallowed hard. And then she made her biggest mistake yet. She reached out and grabbed Danielle's arm. A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. Several passengers stood up. Hannah's face drained of color. Emily pulled her hand back, but it was too late. Danielle tilted her head, not in anger, not in fear, but in something much worse. Absolute control. She picked up her phone, pressed a single button, and lifted it to her ear. And when she spoke, her voice was measured, controlled, and undeniable. "Gate control, this is Danielle Hayes, owner of Hayes Airlines." The entire cabin fell silent. Eyes widened, breaths hitched. And in that moment, Emily Watson realized she had just destroyed her own career. Silence. The entire first-class cabin froze. Passengers who had been half watching, half listening just moments ago were now fully alert, eyes darting between Danielle Hayes and Emily Watson. Emily's breath hitched. For the first time since this flight began, she wasn't in control. Danielle lowered her phone slightly, still holding it near her ear. Her expression was calm, unreadable, but her presence commanded the room. Her next words? They sealed Emily's fate. There's been an incident on Flight 214. Passengers shifted in their seats, realization dawning. This wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. This wasn't just a flight attendant enforcing policy. This was something bigger. Emily's lips parted slightly, her face paling. She had spent years enforcing the rules, but she had just broken the most important one. You do not lay hands on a passenger. Danielle slowly, deliberately, placed her phone on the tray table. She didn't need to say anything else. Her identity alone, owner of Hayes Airlines, had already changed the entire situation. A few rows back, Mia Reynolds let out a low whistle. Well, that just got interesting. Jonathan Price leaned forward, elbows on his knees, watching with a smirk of disbelief. Emily swallowed hard. I didn't, she stammered, her voice suddenly shaky. Danielle's eyes locked onto hers, steady, controlled, unshaken. Emily had spent years treating first class as an exclusive club, one where she got to decide who belonged. And now she was about to find out what real authority looked like. Then a voice crackled over the intercom. Ms. Hayes, we've received your call. We are alerting security upon landing. Do you need anything else? Passengers exchanged glances. Hannah Lee, the younger flight attendant, looked at Emily in stunned silence. Emily stood frozen, her chest rising and falling quickly. Danielle leaned back in her seat, fingers tapping lightly against the armrest. Then finally, she spoke. No, that'll do. She picked up her earbuds, slipped one back in and turned her head to the window as if nothing had happened. The message was clear. Emily Watson was no longer worth her time. The cabin remained silent for the rest of the flight. Emily? She didn't ask to check another ticket. She didn't approach another passenger. She simply stood there, realizing that the power she thought she had. It was never real to begin with. The plane touched down with a smooth glide, the tires skimming the runway before settling into a steady roll. The usual sounds of landing filled the cabin, seatbelts clicking, soft murmurs, the distant hum of the flight crew preparing for arrival. But first class? First class was silent. No one spoke. Not because they were uncomfortable, but because they had just witnessed something unforgettable. Danielle Hayes remained calm. She collected her belongings with the same effortless grace she had carried throughout the flight. No rush. No need for extra words. She had already said everything that needed to be said. Emily Watson, on the other hand, she sat stiffly on the jump seat near the front, her hands clutched together in her lap. She didn't dare look up, didn't dare meet anyone's eyes, because she knew they were all looking at her. Passengers weren't just filming anymore, they weren't just whispering. They were watching, and she knew exactly why. Security was waiting. The doors of the aircraft swung open. Danielle was the first to step off, her presence as controlled and effortless as ever. And then, standing just outside the terminal exit, she waited. Passengers streamed past, stealing quick glances at her, whispering amongst themselves. They weren't just talking about the incident, they were talking about her, the woman who had silently dismantled a power-hungry flight attendant in minutes. Then, Emily appeared, or rather, she was escorted out. Security flanked her on both sides, but they didn't need to touch her. The weight of what had just happened was heavy enough to keep her moving. Each step she took felt like a punishment all on its own. She had seen employees escorted out before, She had heard whispers of flight attendants being let go. She had even been part of the ones enforcing those rules. But never, not once, did she think it would be her. And then she locked eyes with Danielle Hayes. Danielle stood there, unbothered, waiting. No anger, no smugness, no gloating, just waiting. And for the first time in her entire career, Emily Watson felt something she had never allowed herself to feel before. Shame. Not because of what had happened to her, but because of what she had done to herself. Danielle took a single step forward. Her voice was calm, unreadable. "Leaving so soon?" Emily swallowed hard. She had nothing left to say, but Danielle, she wasn't done yet. Emily Watson stood frozen in the terminal, the weight of her actions pressing down on her. Passengers walked past, some shaking their heads, others stealing final glances at the once authoritative flight attendant who had just lost everything. Danielle Hayes? She was still standing there, arms relaxed at her sides, her expression unreadable. Waiting. Watching. And when their eyes met, Emily finally spoke, her voice quieter than it had ever been before. "I was just doing my job." Danielle tilted her head, her lips pressing into a thin line. Then she let out a soft breath. "No." Her voice was steady, controlled, sharp enough to cut through steel. "You weren't doing your job, Emily. You were doing what you thought your job should be." Emily's fingers clenched at her sides. Danielle didn't let her finish. She took a single step forward. "This wasn't about a seating mistake." Another step. "It wasn't about policy." Another step. "It was about you." Emily's breath hitched. She tried to look away, tried to find anywhere else to focus. But she couldn't. Because Danielle wasn't done yet. "You questioned me," she continued, voice unwavering. "Not because I did something wrong, but because you didn't expect someone like me to belong there." The truth landed like a punch to the gut. Passengers were still listening. Some had even stopped walking. Security stood nearby, waiting to escort Emily out of the terminal. Danielle? She never raised her voice. She didn't have to. "You didn't treat me like a customer," she said, voice sharp, final. "You treated me like a mistake." The words settled in the air between them, heavy, irreversible. And for the first time, Emily Watson had nothing left to defend herself with, because deep down, she knew it was true. Emily Watson stood there, her chest rising and falling, her mind racing for something, anything to say. But there was nothing, no excuse, no justification, no argument that could undo what had just happened, because Danielle Hayes was right. Emily had spent years believing she was in control, that her authority gave her the power to decide who belonged and who didn't. But now, she understood something far more painful. Power isn't about controlling others, it's about how you treat them. And Danielle Hayes never needed to prove she belonged, because she already did. Emily, on the other hand, she had just proven that she didn't. Passengers moved past them, their whispers following Emily like a shadow. This wasn't just a lesson learned the hard way, it was a fall from grace in real time. She had lost her uniform, her title, her job. But worse than that, she had lost the trust that came with it. Danielle studied her for a moment longer. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. She didn't need to say anything else, because Emily Watson wasn't just escorted out of the terminal that day, she was escorted out of the life she thought she controlled. And in the end, she became a cautionary tale, a story worth remembering, a reminder that some mistakes cost everything. Was Emily's punishment fair? Should she have been given another chance? Or was this a lesson she needed to learn the hard way? Drop a comment below and let us know what you think. And if you want to see more powerful, real-life stories like this one, make sure to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Until next time, treat people with respect, because you never know who's really sitting in first class.